The fluorescent lights of the LabCorp facility buzzed overhead as I clutched the envelope in my sweaty palms. 21 years of wondering, 21 years of feeling like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, and now I held the answers. Rebecca sat beside me, her leg bouncing nervously against the plastic chair. We'd both submitted our DNA samples 3 weeks ago, convinced we'd finally prove once and for all that we were sisters, despite looking nothing alike. The lab technician, Dr. Amanda Foster, emerged from the back room with 2 identical manila folders. Her expression was carefully neutral, but something in her eyes made my stomach drop. "Are you both ready for your results?" she asked, settling into her chair across from us. Rebecca grabbed my hand, her palm damp with perspiration. We nodded in unison, the way we'd done everything together since childhood. Dr. Foster opened the first folder, and her face shifted almost imperceptibly. She glanced between us, then back at the papers, as if double-checking something that couldn't possibly be right. "I need to ask you both something before we proceed. Are you certain you want these results today? Sometimes families prefer to process this information privately." The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Rebecca's grip on my hand tightened. We'd come too far to back down now. The years of whispered conversations behind closed doors, the way our parents exchanged glances when we asked about baby photos, the complete absence of any pictures from our earliest years. Something had always been off in the Sullivan household, and we were finally going to find out what. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where this all began. Growing up in Scottsdale, Arizona, Rebecca and I were what everyone called the Sullivan sisters. She had striking auburn hair that caught fire in the desert sun, emerald green eyes, and a smattering of freckles across her nose. I was her opposite in every way that mattered. Dark brown hair so deep it looked almost black. Brown eyes that our mother Linda always said reminded her of coffee beans, and olive-toned skin that tanned easily under the Arizona heat. People often asked if we were adopted, usually laughing as if it were the most ridiculous question in the world. Rebecca and I would laugh too, but privately, we'd started wondering the same thing. Our parents, Michael and Linda Sullivan, were textbook middle-class Arizona. Michael worked for State Farm Insurance, had been there for 15 years, drove a silver Toyota Camry, and spent his weekends maintaining our backyard pool. Linda worked as a loan officer at Chase Bank, wore cardigans year-round despite the heat, and had a collection of ceramic roosters that took up an entire shelf in our kitchen. They were the kind of parents who attended every school function, never missed a soccer game, and made sure we had everything we needed. But there was always something missing, something I couldn't quite name until years later when I learned the word performative. The differences between Rebecca and me went beyond appearance. She was naturally gifted at mathematics, could solve complex equations in her head while I struggled with basic algebra. I gravitated toward literature and writing, spending hours crafting stories while she found creative writing to be torture. Rebecca was allergic to shellfish and broke out in hives if she even touched shrimp. I could eat an entire lobster without consequence. She was left-handed, I was right-handed. She had perfect vision while I'd worn glasses since 3rd grade. Small things, perhaps, but they accumulated like drops of water, eventually forming a flood. The questions started innocently enough during my sophomore year of high school. We were studying genetics in biology class, learning about dominant and recessive traits. Our teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had us create family trees and analyze inherited characteristics. I sat at my desk, trying to trace where my dark hair might have come from when both parents were blonde, where my brown eyes originated when both Michael and Linda had blue eyes. The Punnett squares didn't add up. When I raised my hand to ask about exceptions and mutations, Mrs. Henderson gave me a look that suggested I was overcomplicating things. That night at dinner, I casually mentioned the genetics project. "It's funny," I said, twirling spaghetti around my fork, "how Rebecca and I look so different from you guys." Michael's fork clattered against his plate. Linda's hand froze halfway to her water glass. The silence stretched for exactly 7 seconds before Linda forced a laugh and said something about recessive genes being unpredictable. Michael nodded vigorously and changed the subject to Rebecca's upcoming volleyball tournament. but I'd seen something in their faces during those 7 seconds. Recognition. Fear. Guilt. Rebecca had noticed too. Later that night, she crept into my room, closing the door softly behind her. "Did you see how weird they got at dinner?" she whispered, perching on the edge of my bed. I nodded, pulling my knees up to my chest. "Emma, I've been thinking about this for a while. Have you ever seen baby pictures of us? Like, really early ones?" I searched my memory. There were plenty of photos from toddlerhood onward, but nothing from the first year or two of life. When we'd asked about it before, Linda always claimed they'd lost them in a move, or that the camera had broken. That conversation opened a floodgate we couldn't close. Rebecca and I became amateur detectives, searching through closets and storage boxes when our parents weren't home. We found Michael's college transcripts, old tax returns, their marriage certificate, but nothing about our births or early childhood. No hospital bracelets, no first shoes, no locks of baby hair carefully preserved in envelopes. It was as if Emma and Rebecca Sullivan had materialized fully formed at age 3. The breakthrough came during spring break of my junior year. Michael had asked me to help organize the garage, a task that required moving boxes of old documents and seasonal decorations. Rebecca was at volleyball camp, Linda was visiting her sister in Tucson, and Michael was at work. I was alone with 20 years of Sullivan family history spread across the concrete floor. Most of it was mundane. Insurance policies, old bills, instruction manuals for appliances we no longer owned. But tucked behind a box of Christmas ornaments, I found something that made my hands shake. It was a folder marked legal documents, in Linda's careful handwriting. Inside were birth certificates, social security cards, and other official papers. But there were 2 birth certificates for each of us, original ones and amended ones. The amended versions listed Michael and Linda Sullivan as our parents, with birth dates that matched what we'd always celebrated. But the original certificates told a different story. Rebecca's original certificate listed baby girl Rodriguez, with the father listed as Marcus Rodriguez and the mother as unknown. Mine read baby girl Chen, with Dr. Sarah Chen as the mother and father unknown. I sat on the garage floor, surrounded by the detritus of a life built on lies, and tried to process what I was seeing. We weren't just not biological sisters. We weren't related to Michael and Linda at all. We were both adopted, but separately, from different families, and no one had ever told us. The dates on the certificates showed that Rebecca had been adopted first, when she was barely 2 months old. I had arrived 6 months later, at age 4 months. The Sullivans had built an entire family out of other people's children, and never said a word. My first instinct was to confront them immediately, to march into the house waving the birth certificates and demanding explanations. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of how panicked they'd looked during that dinner conversation about genetics. Maybe it was the careful way they'd hidden these documents. Not destroyed them, but buried them deep enough that we'd never accidentally stumble across them. Or maybe it was the realization that if they'd lied about this, there might be other lies, bigger ones, that I needed to uncover first. I photographed the birth certificates with my phone, carefully returned everything to its original position, and spent the rest of the day in a daze. When Rebecca came home from volleyball camp 2 days later, I pulled her into my room and showed her the photos. She stared at the screen for a long time, zooming in on the names and dates, as if hoping they might change if she looked hard enough. "So we're not sisters," she said finally, her voice hollow. Not really. I wanted to contradict her, to say that family was about more than biology, but the words stuck in my throat. Because if we weren't biological sisters, and we weren't their biological daughters, then what were we? A collection of convenient lies? A carefully constructed illusion? "We need to find out more," I said instead. "We need to know who these people are. Dr. Sarah Chen and Marcus Rodriguez. We need to know why we ended up here." Rebecca nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We were about to open a door that could never be closed, about to ask questions that might destroy the only family we'd ever known. The research began slowly, carefully. We couldn't risk Michael and Linda discovering what we were doing, so we worked in fragments. During lunch breaks at school, I used the library computers to search for Dr. Sarah Chen. Rebecca researched Marcus Rodriguez during her study halls. We created fake email accounts and used VPNs to cover our digital tracks. What we found was both illuminating and confusing. Dr. Sarah Chen was a fertility specialist who had practiced in Phoenix during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Her clinic had closed abruptly in 2003, the same year I was born, amid some kind of scandal that the news reports described only in vague terms. The articles mentioned ethical violations and improper procedures, but never specified exactly what had happened. Dr. Chen herself had disappeared from public view after the clinic closure. Marcus Rodriguez proved more difficult to trace. There were dozens of men with that name in the Phoenix area, but none seemed to connect to our timeline. Rebecca eventually found an old employment record showing a Marcus Rodriguez who had worked as a landscaper for several wealthy Scottsdale neighborhoods in the early 2000s. The address listed was for an apartment complex that had been demolished years ago. The more we researched, the more questions arose. Why had the Sullivans adopted two unrelated babies within 6 months of each other? Why had they never told us we were adopted? And why had they gone to such lengths to hide our original identities? The lies felt intentional, systematic, as if they were protecting not just a secret but a conspiracy. 3 weeks before Rebecca's 21st birthday, we made the decision that would change everything. We were going to get professional DNA tests, not the ancestry kind that might reveal distant cousins, but medical-grade paternity and maternity tests that would definitively answer whether Michael and Linda Sullivan were our biological parents. We knew what the birth certificates had already told us, but we needed scientific proof, something undeniable that we could present as evidence. The DNA testing facility was a sterile, fluorescent-lit place that smelled of disinfectant and anxiety. We'd scheduled our appointment during Rebecca's lunch break from her summer job at Target, telling Linda we were going shopping at the mall. The technician, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and steady hands, explained the process as she swabbed the inside of our cheeks. The samples would be compared against DNA we'd collected from Michael and Linda's hairbrushes, carefully retrieved during what we told them was a deep cleaning project in their bathroom. Results will be ready in 2 weeks, the technician said, sealing our samples in labeled containers. We'll call you when they're in. 2 weeks felt like an eternity. Rebecca and I went through the motions of normal life, work, summer classes, family dinners, while internally counting down the days until we'd have scientific confirmation of what we already suspected. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Rebecca was at work and I was home alone, supposedly studying for my summer psychology course. The voice on the phone was professionally neutral. Ms. Sullivan, this is LabCorp. Your DNA results are ready. Can you and your sister come in today? There was something in the woman's tone, a careful quality that suggested the results were more complicated than a simple positive or negative. We scheduled the appointment for that afternoon, telling our parents we were going to see a movie. The drive to the lab felt surreal, as if we were floating through a dream sequence. Rebecca kept checking her appearance in the passenger mirror, smoothing her auburn hair and adjusting her clothes. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles white against the black plastic. Whatever this says, Rebecca said as we pulled into the parking lot, we're still sisters. Biology doesn't change that. I wanted to believe her, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. We were about to learn not just whether Michael and Linda were our parents, but potentially who our real parents were. The birth certificates had given us names, but names weren't people. Names weren't explanations. The lab waiting room was empty, except for us, and a man in his 50s who kept checking his phone nervously. Rebecca and I sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, reading the same magazine pages over and over without absorbing any information. When Dr. Foster finally called our names, we followed her into a small consultation room with motivational posters on the walls and a box of tissues prominently placed on the desk. I want to prepare you both, Dr. Foster said, settling in. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Into her chair with our files. These results are quite unusual. In 20 years of conducting DNA tests, I've rarely seen anything quite like this. She opened the first folder, then the second, comparing something between them. Emma, Rebecca, neither of you is biologically related to Michael or Linda Sullivan. But that's not the most surprising part. Rebecca's hand found mine across the small space between our chairs. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew we were about to learn something that would reshape everything we thought we understood about our lives. Dr. Foster looked at us both carefully, as if measuring our readiness for what came next. "You're also not biologically related to each other. Emma, your DNA shows markers consistent with East Asian heritage on the maternal side. Rebecca, yours shows Hispanic heritage on the paternal side and Northern European on the maternal side. You come from completely different genetic backgrounds." The room went silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Rebecca's hand went limp in mine. I felt something inside my chest crack, not painfully but definitively, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. We weren't sisters. We weren't their daughters. We were strangers who had been placed in the same house and told we belonged together. "There's more," Dr. Foster continued gently. "Based on the genetic markers, I was able to cross-reference some databases. Emma, your maternal DNA is a partial match for Dr. Sarah Chen, the fertility specialist. It's likely she's your biological mother. Rebecca, your paternal markers match a Marcus Rodriguez, who was in the system due to a minor arrest in 2004. The timing would be consistent with the ages on your birth certificates." I stared at her, trying to process the information. My mother was Dr. Sarah Chen, the fertility doctor whose clinic had closed under mysterious circumstances. Rebecca's father was Marcus Rodriguez, the landscaper whose address had vanished, along with the apartment complex where he'd lived. We weren't just adopted. We were the products of some larger story that Michael and Linda had spent 2 decades helping us avoid. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, her voice small and unfamiliar. Dr. Foster handed us each a folder containing our complete results, contact information for genetic counseling services, and resources for people discovering unexpected family information. "That's entirely up to you," she said. "Some people choose to search for their biological families. Others decide the family they grew up with is enough. There's no right answer." As we walked back to my car in the blazing Arizona afternoon, Rebecca and I didn't speak. The silence between us felt different now, charged with the knowledge that we were no longer who we'd thought we were that morning. I started the engine and turned up the air conditioning, but the cool air couldn't touch the heat of confusion and betrayal burning in my chest. "We have to confront them," Rebecca said finally as we sat in the parking lot. "Michael and Linda, they've been lying to us our entire lives." I nodded, but my mind was racing beyond the immediate confrontation. If Dr. Sarah Chen was my mother, she might still be alive. If Marcus Rodriguez was Rebecca's father, he might be searching for the daughter he never knew he had. We weren't just going to destroy the lies that had shaped our lives. We were going to rebuild ourselves from the ground up. The drive home felt like traveling through a foreign country. Every familiar landmark, the Starbucks where we'd gotten coffee before school, the park where we'd played as children, the grocery store where Linda sent us for milk and bread, looked different through the lens of what we now knew. We weren't the Sullivan sisters driving through our neighborhood. We were Emma Chen and Rebecca Rodriguez, strangers who had shared a house and a lie for 21 years. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw Michael's Camry already parked in its usual spot. He was home early from work, which never happened unless something was wrong. Through the kitchen window, I could see him and Linda sitting at the table, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. For a moment, I wondered if they somehow knew what we'd discovered, if they could sense that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Rebecca and I sat in my car for another minute, air conditioning running, neither of us ready to go inside and begin the conversation that would end everything we'd thought we knew about our family. "Whatever happens in there," I said, looking at my sister, former sister, best friend, whatever she was to me now, "we figure it out together." She nodded, but I could see tears forming in her green eyes, the eyes that came from some other family, some other story we'd never been told. We got out of the car and walked toward the front door, carrying the folders that contained the scientific proof of 21 years of deception. I thought about all the family dinners, all the birthday parties, all the times Linda had called us her girls, and Michael had talked about his daughters. Had any of it been real, or were we just characters in a play they'd been directing since we were infants? The front door opened before we could reach for the handle. Linda stood there, still wearing her bank uniform, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the heat. "Girls," she said, and something in her voice suggested she knew exactly where we'd been and what we'd learned. "We need to talk." The front door opened before we could reach for the handle. Linda stood there, still wearing her bank uniform, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the heat. "Girls," she said, and something in her voice suggested she knew exactly where we'd been and what we'd learned. "We need to talk." Michael appeared behind her, his insurance company polo shirt wrinkled and his usually calm demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before: panic. His blue eyes darted between Rebecca and me, lingering on the folders we carried. "Come inside," he said quietly. "Please." We followed them into the living room, the same space where we'd celebrated countless birthdays, watched Disney movies during sick days, and opened Christmas presents for 20 years. The sectional couch where Rebecca and I had spent hours doing homework suddenly felt like foreign territory. Linda sat on the edge of the coffee table facing us, while Michael paced behind her like a caged animal. "How long have you known?" Linda asked, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. Rebecca and I exchanged glances. Even now, even after everything, they were trying to control the narrative. "Known what exactly?" I said, setting my folder on the couch beside me. "That we're not your biological children? That we're not sisters? That our entire lives have been built on lies?" My voice was surprisingly calm, but I could feel anger building beneath the surface, like pressure in a volcano. Michael stopped pacing and looked directly at me for what felt like the first time in years. "Emma, it's not that simple. You have to understand." "No," Rebecca interrupted, her voice sharp. "We don't have to understand anything. You owe us explanations. 21 years of explanations." She opened her folder and pulled out the DNA results. "Dr. Sarah Chen. Marcus Rodriguez. Ring any bells?" The color drained from Linda's face. Michael sat down heavily in his recliner, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with the weight of secrets that had been buried for too long. "We never meant for you to find out this way," Linda said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We hoped. "You hoped we'd never find out at all," I said. "You hoped we'd live our entire lives, not knowing who we really are, where we came from, whether we have other family members out there who might be looking for us." Michael's face crumpled. "We were protecting you. Both of you. The circumstances, they were complicated." "Then uncomplicate them," Rebecca said, leaning forward in her chair. "Start talking. Start with the truth." Linda took a shaky breath and looked at Michael, who nodded slowly. "It started in 2002, she began. We'd been trying to have children for 5 years. Multiple miscarriages, failed IVF attempts, thousands of dollars in medical bills. The doctors said it was unlikely we'd ever conceive naturally. So you decided to adopt," I said. "That's not complicated. That's beautiful. Why lie about it?" "Because it wasn't a normal adoption," Michael said quietly. "We couldn't qualify through traditional agencies. My credit was ruined from all the medical debt, and Linda had been seeing a therapist for depression. The social workers, they had concerns." Linda's hands twisted in her lap. Dr. Sarah Chen ran a fertility clinic, but she also helped arrange private adoptions. Off the books. She specialized in helping couples who couldn't navigate the traditional system. "Off the books," Rebecca repeated slowly. "You mean illegal." "Not illegal exactly," Linda said quickly. "More like unregulated. Dr. Chen worked with young women who found themselves in difficult situations. Women who needed financial help, who couldn't raise children themselves. She connected them with families like ours." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What kind of difficult situations?" Michael and Linda exchanged another look, and I saw resignation pass between them. They were finally going to tell us everything. "Your mother, Emma," Linda said softly. "Dr. Sarah Chen. She wasn't just running the clinic. She was one of the women in a difficult situation. She'd gotten pregnant during medical school, The father was already married, and she couldn't afford to raise a child while finishing her residency. The room spun slightly. She gave me up for adoption to her own clients? It was more complicated than that. Dr. Chen's clinic was being investigated by the state medical board. There were allegations that she was manipulating fertility treatments, that some of the pregnancies weren't natural. When she found out she was pregnant herself, and with the investigation closing in, she needed to disappear quickly. So she gave me to you and vanished, I said, the pieces clicking into place. That's why her clinic closed. That's why there's no record of her after 2003. Linda nodded miserably. She knew we were desperate for a child. She'd seen how much we wanted a family. When she offered us the chance to adopt you, it felt like a miracle. And Rebecca? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be just as disturbing. Michael cleared his throat. Marcus Rodriguez worked as a landscaper for several families in our neighborhood. He was young, maybe 19 or 20, and he'd gotten involved with an older woman, married woman. When she got pregnant, her husband thought it was his for the first few months. Rebecca had gone very still beside me. What happened when he found out? The husband filed for divorce and threw both the woman and the baby out. She couldn't take care of Rebecca alone, couldn't afford it, and Marcus, he was terrified. He was in the country illegally, working under a false name. He thought if anyone found out about the baby, he'd be deported. So they just gave her away too, Rebecca said flatly. Like I was a problem to be solved. Dr. Chen was already arranging your adoption, Emma, Linda continued. When she heard about Rebecca's situation through her network, she suggested we take both babies. We'd always wanted more than one child, and you were only 4 months apart in age. It seemed perfect. Perfect for you, I said. What about us? What about our right to know where we came from? We planned to tell you when you were older, Michael said. But as the years went by, it got harder. You both seemed so happy, so settled. We convinced ourselves that the truth would only hurt you. The truth is hurting us now, Rebecca said, her voice rising. 21 years later, when we found out by accident. Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that your entire identity is a lie? Linda started crying then, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. We love you both so much. From the moment you came into our lives, you were our daughters. Biology doesn't change that. But lies do, I said. Every birthday when you sang happy birthday, and never mentioned that you didn't know the real date we were born. Every time someone said we looked different from you, and you changed the subject. Every family tree project, every medical form asking for family history. You let us live in ignorance. We gave you a good life, Michael said defensively. A stable home, education, opportunities. Built on deception, Rebecca interrupted. Do you understand that we spent months researching genetics, wondering why we didn't look like you, why we had different talents and allergies and preferences? We thought something was wrong with us. And now we find out that Dr. Sarah Chen and Marcus Rodriguez might still be alive, I said. That we might have had the chance to know our biological parents, to understand where we came from, to have relationships with them. But you stole that from us. The fight seemed to go out of both Michael and Linda then. They sat in silence, looking older than I'd ever seen them, while Rebecca and I processed the magnitude of what they'd revealed. Do you have contact information for them? Rebecca asked quietly. For our birth parents? Michael shook his head. Dr. Chen disappeared after your adoption was finalized. We tried to reach Marcus a few years later, just to let him know you were doing well, but the phone number we had was disconnected. His apartment was empty. So we're on our own, I said. It wasn't a question. You don't have to be, Linda said urgently. You're still our daughters. This house is still your home. Nothing has to change. Everything has already changed, Rebecca said, standing up from the couch. The moment we walked into that lab and learned the truth, everything changed. I stood up too, gathering my folder. We need time to process this, to figure out what comes next. Where will you go? Michael asked, and I heard genuine concern in his voice despite everything. Tyler's family has an extra room, I said, referring to my best friend from high school. We'll figure it out. Emma, Rebecca, please, Linda said, reaching out as if to touch us. Don't let this destroy our family. Rebecca paused at the doorway. Our family was destroyed 21 years ago when you decided to build it on lies. We're just finally seeing the damage. We packed in silence, moving through the house that had been our home like ghosts. I took clothes, my laptop, important documents, and a few photographs. Ironically, none of them from our early childhood, since those apparently didn't exist. Rebecca packed efficiently, taking only what she needed and leaving behind most of the things that had defined her life as Rebecca Sullivan. As we loaded my car, Linda and Michael stood in the doorway watching us. Neither tried to stop us or make promises they couldn't keep. I think they finally understood that this wasn't something that could be fixed with apologies or explanations. "Will you call us?" Linda asked as I started the engine. "When we're ready," I said, which felt like the most honest answer I could give. The drive to Tyler's house was quiet. Rebecca stared out the passenger window at the neighborhoods we'd grown up in, and I wondered if she was feeling the same strange disconnection I was. These streets, these houses, these familiar landmarks suddenly felt like someone else's memories. Tyler's parents, Maria and Robert Martinez, welcomed us without question when I called to explain the situation in the most basic terms. "Family emergency," I'd said. "We need a place to stay for a while." They cleared out their guest room and gave us space to breathe without demanding details we weren't ready to share. That night, Rebecca and I lay in twin beds pushed against opposite walls of Tyler's childhood bedroom, staring at glow-in-the-dark stars that someone had stuck to the ceiling years earlier. The silence between us was different now, heavy with the knowledge that we weren't sisters in any biological sense. "Do you want to find them?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "Dr. Chen and Marcus Rodriguez?" I'd been wondering the same thing. "I think so, don't you?" "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if they don't want to know us? What if they've moved on, built new lives, had other families? What if they've been looking for us this whole time?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "What if we find them and realize that Michael and Linda were right? What if knowing the truth really does hurt more than living with the lies?" "I don't think we have a choice anymore," I said. "I can't unknow what I know. Can you?" "No," she said softly. "I can't." The next morning, I started with Dr. Sarah Chen. If she was my biological mother, if she'd given me up because of circumstances rather than lack of caring, then maybe she was findable. The internet had evolved significantly since 2003, and people left digital footprints whether they intended to or not. I started with professional medical licensing boards, searching for any record of Sarah Chen reinventing herself in another state. It took hours of digging through databases and cross-referencing information, but eventually I found a lead. Dr. S. Chen had registered with the Oregon Medical Board in 2004, listing her specialty as family medicine rather than fertility treatment. The address was for a small clinic in Portland, but when I called, the receptionist told me that Dr. Chen had left several years earlier. However, she'd stayed in the area and was now working at a community health center in a neighborhood called Sellwood. My hands shook as I dialed the number for the Sellwood Community Health Center. When the receptionist answered, I asked to speak with Dr. Sarah Chen. "May I ask what this is regarding?" the woman asked. "It's personal," I said. "Family matter." "One moment, please." The hold music seemed to go on forever. I was sitting in Tyler's backyard, staring at the mountains in the distance, when a voice came on the line that made my breath catch. "This is Dr. Chen." Her voice was warm but professional, with just a hint of an accent that I couldn't place. I realized I had no idea what to say. "Dr. Chen," I began, then stopped. "My name is Emma Sullivan, but I think I might be Emma Chen." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard her intake of breath, sharp and sudden. "Emma?" she whispered. "I found out yesterday that you're my biological mother," I said, the words tumbling out. "I've been looking for you. I hope that's okay." "Oh my God," she said, and I could hear that she was crying. "Emma, my Emma. I've been looking for you too." The conversation that followed was awkward and emotional and wonderful all at once. She told me about the investigation that had closed her clinic, about the difficult decision to give me up, about the years she'd spent wondering what had happened to me. She'd tried to contact the Sullivans several times but had been told that the adoption was closed and no contact was allowed. "I never stopped thinking about you," she said. "I became a family doctor because I wanted to help people the way I wished I could have helped myself back then. Every patient I see, every child, I wonder what you look like, what kind of person you became." "I look like you," I said, comparing her voice to the face I saw in mirrors. "I have your eyes, according to the DNA report. Would you like to meet?" she asked hesitantly. "I understand if you need time, or if you're not ready, but—" "Yes," I said quickly. "Yes, I'd like that very much." We arranged to meet the following weekend. She would fly to Phoenix, and we'd have dinner at a neutral restaurant, somewhere we could talk without pressure or expectations. Rebecca had been listening to my half of the conversation from the porch swing, and when I hung up, she looked both hopeful and terrified. "She wants to meet me," I said. "She's been looking for me too." "That's amazing," Rebecca said, but I could hear the sadness in her voice. Her search for Marcus Rodriguez was proving more difficult. The landscaping company he'd worked for was long gone, and the name was common enough that tracking him down felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. "We'll find him," I said, sitting down beside her on the swing. "Or maybe he'll find you. Maybe he's been looking too." "Maybe," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. The week passed slowly. I went through the motions of my summer job at the bookstore, but my mind was constantly on the upcoming meeting with Dr. Chen. Rebecca threw herself into research, spending hours on genealogy websites and social media platforms, trying to trace any connection to Marcus Rodriguez. Then, 3 days before my scheduled meeting with Dr. Chen, Rebecca's phone rang while we were eating dinner with Tyler's family. "Unknown number," she said, frowning at the screen. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept the call. "Hello?" I watched her face change as the person on the other end spoke. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. "Yes," she said shakily. "Yes, this is Rebecca. How did you find me?" She walked outside to continue the conversation in private, leaving me to wonder and worry with Tyler's family. 20 minutes later, she came back inside with tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "That was Marcus Rodriguez," she said. "My father. He's been looking for me for 20 years. The story he'd told her was heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. After Rebecca was given up for adoption, he'd gotten his immigration status sorted out and had spent years trying to track down what had happened to his daughter. He'd hired private investigators, contacted adoption agencies, and searched public records. The closed nature of the adoption and the use of false names had made it nearly impossible. But then, 2 weeks earlier, a friend who worked in law enforcement had mentioned a new database that cross-referenced DNA profiles with missing persons reports. Marcus had submitted his DNA years ago, hoping for a match, and the system had finally connected him to Rebecca's recent test. "He wants to meet me too," Rebecca said, wiping her eyes. "He's coming to Phoenix next week." Suddenly, everything was happening at once. We went from having no biological family to potentially having relationships with both our birth parents. It felt surreal, like we were living in someone else's story. The meeting with Dr. Sarah Chen took place at a quiet restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale. I arrived early and sat at a corner table, nervously checking my phone and watching the door. When she walked in, I knew instantly it was her. We had the same dark hair, the same brown eyes, the same way of holding our shoulders when we were nervous. She was smaller than I'd expected, more delicate, but her presence filled the space as she approached my table. We stared at each other for a moment before she opened her arms, and I found myself hugging my biological mother for the first time in 21 years. "You're so beautiful," she said, holding me at arm's length and studying my face. "You look exactly like I imagined you would." We talked for 3 hours, filling in decades of missing information. She told me about her life in Portland, her work at the community clinic, her decision never to have other children, because she couldn't bear the thought of replacing me. I told her about growing up with the Sullivans, about school and books and my plans for college, about the gradual realization that something wasn't quite right in our family. "I'm so sorry," she said when I explained how we discovered the truth. "I thought they would tell you about the adoption when you were old enough to understand. I never imagined they'd hide it completely." "They thought they were protecting us," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Protection built on deception isn't protection at all," she said firmly. "You deserve to know the truth. You deserve to have choices." As the evening wound down, she handed me a small photo album she'd brought from Portland. "These are pictures from when I was pregnant with you," she said, "and some from my life over the years. I know it's not the same as being there, but I wanted you to see that you were always part of my story, even when you weren't physically present." I flipped through the pages, seeing her younger face, seeing the progression of her pregnancy, seeing glimpses of the life I might have had if circumstances had been different. "What happens now?" I asked. "Whatever you want to happen," she said. "I'd love to be part of your life, but I understand if you need time or space. 21 years is a lot to overcome." "I'd like to try," I said, "to build something. It won't be a normal mother-daughter relationship, but maybe it can be something good." She smiled, and I saw my own smile reflected in her face. "I'd like that too." Rebecca's meeting with Marcus Rodriguez was equally emotional, but completely different in tone. Where Dr. Chen and I had approached each other carefully, with medical precision and emotional restraint, Rebecca and Marcus met with an explosion of joy and tears that could be heard throughout the restaurant. He was a big man with calloused hands and kind eyes, who looked at Rebecca like she was the most precious thing he'd ever seen. He brought photo albums too, but also a wooden jewelry box he'd carved by hand when she was a baby, believing he might someday have the chance to give it to her. "I never stopped believing I'd find you," he told her, his English accented but clear. "Every birthday I would light a candle and make a wish that you were healthy and happy somewhere." He'd built a successful landscaping business over the years, had married a woman who understood about his missing daughter, and had decorated their home with pictures of flowers because he'd heard once that Rebecca meant to bind, and he'd hoped she might bind their family back together someday. "Do I have siblings?" Rebecca asked, and I could see the hope and fear warring in her expression. "Two little brothers," Marcus said, pulling out his phone to show her pictures. "Miguel is 15, and Carlos just turned 12. They've been asking about their big sister for years." The revelation that Rebecca had half-brothers who knew about her, who had been waiting to meet her, brought fresh tears to both their eyes. As Rebecca and I compared notes about our meetings over the following days, we realized how different our situations were, and yet how similar our emotions felt. We were both excited and terrified, hopeful and confused, grateful and angry all at the same time. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Rebecca asked one evening as we sat on Tyler's back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I think we made the only choice we could live with," I said. "We couldn't unknow what we knew, and now we have the chance to know more." "What about Michael and Linda?" That was the question we'd been avoiding. Our adoptive parents had called several times, leaving voicemails asking us to come home, to talk, to work things out. But neither of us felt ready to face them yet. "I think eventually we'll have to deal with them," I said. "They're still the people who raised us, who loved us in their way. But right now I need to focus on moving forward, not looking back." "Do you think they knew?" Rebecca asked. "About Dr. Chen wanting to stay in contact? About Marcus looking for me?" "I think they knew and chose to keep us separated from our biological families," I said. "And that's something I'm not sure I can forgive." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about all the years Marcus spent looking for me, all the birthdays he celebrated alone, all the times Dr. Chen wondered if you were okay. They stole that from all of us." 2 weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to move to Portland to spend time with Dr. Chen, to learn about that side of my heritage, to build a relationship with the woman who had given me life. Rebecca was planning to stay in Phoenix to get to know Marcus and her half-brothers, to become part of a family that had been incomplete without her. The night before I left for Portland, Rebecca and I sat in the guest room at Tyler's house, packing my belongings into suitcases and boxes. Are we still sisters? She asked suddenly, voicing the question that had been lurking beneath the surface of every conversation we'd had since learning the truth. I looked at her, this person who had shared my childhood, my secrets, my struggles for 21 years. Biology hadn't made us sisters, but love had. Experience had. The thousand small moments that had shaped who we were together. We're not biological sisters, I said carefully, but we're something maybe more important. We're chosen family. We chose each other every day for 21 years, and we're choosing each other now. Even though we're going to different places, different families. Distance doesn't change love, I said. And besides, now we both have two families instead of one. You've got Marcus, and Miguel, and Carlos, and I've got Dr. Chen. But we've also got each other? Rebecca smiled through her tears. Emma Chen and Rebecca Rodriguez. It has a nice ring to it, I agreed. The last thing I did before leaving Phoenix was write a letter to Michael and Linda Sullivan. I couldn't bring myself to see them in person, but I owed them some explanation for the choices I was making. Dear Michael and Linda, I wrote, I want you to know that I don't hate you. I understand that you thought you were doing what was best for Rebecca and me, but the foundation of our family was built on lies, and that foundation has cracked beyond repair. I need time to build something new, something honest, with the people who share my blood and my story. Maybe someday we can find a way to have a relationship that's based on truth instead of deception. But that day isn't today. Thank you for the good things you gave me. Education, opportunities, a stable home. I won't forget those gifts, even as I work to understand the ones you kept from me. Love, Emma. I left the letter on their front porch early in the morning, before my flight to Portland. I didn't ring the doorbell or wait to see if they found it. Some conversations were too big for face-to-face meetings, at least not yet. 3 months later, I was settling into a small apartment near the community health center where Dr. Sarah Chen worked. I'd enrolled in Portland State University to finish my degree in literature, and I spent my free time learning about my Chinese heritage, my mother's journey from medical school to family practice, and the complicated decisions that had led to my adoption. Rebecca was thriving in Phoenix, working as a math tutor while getting to know her father and half-brothers. Marcus had introduced her to extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins who had wondered about the missing daughter for decades. She sent me pictures of family barbecues and soccer games, of a life rich with connection and belonging. We talked on the phone every few days, sharing our discoveries and our struggles, our joy at finding our birth families and our grief for the years we'd lost. Sometimes we talked about Michael and Linda, who had started family therapy and had asked, through Tyler's family, if we might be willing to join them someday. Maybe, Rebecca had said, when we're stronger, when we know who we are without them. Dr. Chen and I were building our relationship slowly, carefully, like architects constructing a bridge across a 21-year gap. Some days were easier than others. Some days the weight of lost time felt overwhelming. But most days I felt grateful for the chance to know her, to understand where I came from, to see myself reflected in someone else's face. She told me stories about her own childhood in Taiwan, about immigrating to the United States for medical school, about the choices and sacrifices that had led her to give me up and spend decades wondering if she'd made the right decision. Do you regret it? I asked her one evening as we cooked dinner together in her small kitchen. She was quiet for a long moment, stirring a pot of soup that smelled like home even though I'd never tasted it before. I regret the circumstances that made it necessary, she said finally. I regret that I couldn't give you the life you deserved when you were born. But I don't regret that you ended up with people who could provide for you, who could give you opportunities I couldn't offer at the time. Even though they lied to me about you? That part breaks my heart, she admitted. I always hoped you would find me someday, that you would want to know your story. I'm grateful you finally did. 6 months after leaving Phoenix, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through Tyler's family. It was from Linda Sullivan, written in her careful handwriting on bank stationery. Dear Emma, it read, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that Michael and I are getting divorced. The lies we told you and Rebecca have poisoned everything between us. We can't look at each other without remembering what we kept from you, what we stole from you. I want you to know that you were wanted, that you were loved, that every day you were in our house was a gift we cherished. But I also want you to know that I understand why you had to leave. I hope someday you can forgive us. I hope someday you'll want to see us again. But if that day never comes, I want you to know that loving you was the best thing I ever did, even if I did it imperfectly. Love always, Linda. I cried when I read the letter, not from sadness, but from a complicated mix of grief and relief. The family I'd grown up in was dissolving, but the family I was building was growing stronger every day. A year later, Rebecca and I met in Las Vegas for what we called our sisterhood anniversary, 1 year since we'd learned the truth about our origins. We spent 3 days catching up, sharing photos from our new lives, and marveling at how much had changed. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never found out? Rebecca asked as we sat by the hotel pool, watching tourists splash in the artificial waves. Sometimes, I said, but I don't think we could have lived with not knowing forever. The questions would have eaten us alive eventually. Do you think we're happier now? I considered the question seriously. My life in Portland was good but complicated. Building a relationship with Dr. Chen required constant navigation of boundaries and expectations. Learning about my heritage was fascinating but sometimes overwhelming. Some days I missed the simplicity of being Emma Sullivan, even if that identity had been built on lies. I think we're more authentic now, I said finally. Happiness is harder to measure, but I feel like myself in a way I never did before. Rebecca nodded. I feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life. Not just because Marcus wants me there, but because I understand why I am the way I am. The math skills, the left-handedness, even the way I laugh. It all comes from somewhere real now. As we prepared to return to our respective new lives, Rebecca and I made a pact. We would always be sisters. Regardless of biology or geography, or the complicated families we were building, we would visit each other regularly, support each other's choices, and maintain the bond that had carried us through 21 years of lies and into a future built on truth. To the Chen Rodriguez sisters, Rebecca said, raising her glass of overpriced hotel wine. To chosen family, I replied, clinking my glass against hers. 2 years after leaving Phoenix, I finally felt ready to see Michael and Linda Sullivan again. Dr. Chen encouraged the meeting, pointing out that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing their actions, but about freeing myself from the anger that was taking up too much space in my heart. We met at the same Olive Garden where this story had begun, though the circumstances couldn't have been more different. Linda looked smaller than I remembered, her blonde hair showing gray roots she hadn't bothered to touch up. Michael seemed older too, wearing a wedding ring I didn't recognize. Apparently he'd remarried, someone who didn't carry the weight of 2 decades of shared deception. Thank you for agreeing to see us, Linda said when I sat down across from them. I wasn't sure you ever would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. But Dr. Chen helped me understand that carrying anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. We talked for 2 hours, addressing the lies and the pain and the choices that had torn our family apart. They apologized repeatedly, explaining their motivations without trying to excuse their actions. I told them about my life in Portland, about my relationship with Dr. Chen, about the peace I'd found in finally knowing the truth about my origins. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive us? Linda asked as we prepared to leave. I think I already have, I said, surprising myself with the words. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't happen. But it does mean choosing not to let your mistakes define the rest of my life. Michael hugged me goodbye, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine rather than performative. I'm proud of who you've become, he said, even though we don't deserve credit for it. You do deserve some credit, I said. You gave me 18 years of stability and education and opportunities. Those things matter, even if they came with a cost. As I drove away from the restaurant, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The Sullivan chapter of my life wasn't erased, but it was no longer the only chapter. I was Emma Chen now, daughter of Dr. Sarah Chen, former Emma Sullivan, forever sister to Rebecca Rodriguez. I was a collection of stories and relationships and choices, some made by me and some made for me, all contributing to the person I was becoming. Rebecca and I continued to grow our chosen family, now spread across 3 states and anchored by love rather than lies. We introduced our birth parents to each other during a memorable weekend in Denver, where Dr. Chen and Marcus Rodriguez discovered they had more in common than just having given up children to the same adoptive family. "It's strange," Dr. Chen said as we all sat around Marcus's kitchen table, sharing stories and looking through photo albums. "We're connected by the most important decisions of our lives, but we never would have met under normal circumstances." "Maybe these aren't normal circumstances," Marcus replied, watching Rebecca help his younger sons with their homework. "Maybe this is what family is supposed to look like. Messy and complicated and full of people who choose to love each other despite everything." I looked around the table at this unlikely collection of people, my birth mother and Rebecca's birth father, Rebecca's half-brothers who had become my honorary siblings, Marcus's wife who had welcomed all of us with open arms. It wasn't the family I'd grown up thinking I had, but it was real in a way the Sullivan family had never been. "To chosen family," Rebecca said, raising her water glass in a toast. "To truth," I added. "To second chances," Dr. Chen said. "To love that doesn't require lies," Marcus concluded. We clinked our glasses together, sealing our promise to build something better from the ruins of what we'd lost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.